The following is a production of Texas Lutheran University. For more information, please visit tlu.edu.
Find ourselves here in Jackson Auditorium for our discussion of the TLU Reader. It will be presented to our students for the first time this fall. My name is Beth Berry, and it was my pleasure to help to edit this and to write the introduction.
My name is Dr. Tiffany Sia. I teach in the Department of Psychology, usually classes like social psych and developmental psych, and the article I wrote was teaching your cognitive miser generosity.
I'm Dr. John McCluskey. I'm a chemist. I teach organic chemistry, primarily those sorts of classes, and I wrote about the problem of problem solving, learning to change the world.
And I'm Professor Melanie Thompson, and I'm an accounting professor in the Department of Business and Economics. My article was What Would You Do?, which deals with making ethical decisions, which really came from my experience in enforcement while I was working at the State Board of Accountancy in the enforcement area. So that's where mine came from.
And of course, work on the book began more than a year ago now.
Yes.
When we were all approached by Dr. Phil Ruby-Jones. He had an idea, he had a vision, and wanted us to collaborate together. And so I'm wondering if you could each comment on your response and how you began to think about your chapter. Dr. Sia?
Well, initially he had asked me to look at critical thinking and how to help students to think critically. And I had just finished doing a presentation at a local conference on the way our brain tricks us into processing information. And that had been very well received, and I thought it might be more easy for our students to comprehend, and I really wanted to address the defensiveness issue, because a lot of times when students are trying to think critically and a faculty member might say, well, you need to pay attention to details, you need to do this, that, the other, they will say, I did. And then they're angry, and then it's easy for the faculty member to also feel like, well, you couldn't have, or you would have noticed this. And a lot of that has to do with how our brain processes information. So I talked with him that first meeting, and he was like, oh, okay, you can teach us how our brain tricks us into making totally false assumptions that get in the way of actual learning. And that's kind of how it came about.
Excellent.
Dr. Ruby-Jones asked me if I would write a chapter on problem solving. That's an area that's very important in chemistry and can be a challenge for a lot of students. We've actually developed in the chemistry department a course on problem solving because it is so difficult. So that seemed like a great idea to me, and I can't say I jumped right in and started writing, but I started thinking about it.
Well, and for me, he approached me as well, but he was aware that we do debates in our business ethics class, and he thought it would be interesting to have an article in the book about those debates and how those occur and what that is like for a student. So he came to me with the subject, and when he came initially I said, oh, that would be interesting, sure. And then I forgot about it for a while until it got to be summer, and then it suddenly dawned on me that I actually had to produce this article. But he came with that in mind, but I said yes right away.
Excellent. And so from the beginning, we all knew that this was going to be a part of our freshman reader. In what ways were you thinking about the students as you were writing your chapter?
At the time I was teaching, it was my second year teaching the freshman experience course, and I had a really diverse bunch of students, several who were very motivated and others who really lacked focus. And it was very easy to see where people were making mistakes in their thinking, so I really wanted to help people understand some of the simple concepts, like we see what we want to see rather than what's actually there, and especially in the syllabus. Everyone wants to see the end of the syllabus, not what's actually in it. So.
Okay, Dr. McCluskey?
It was an interesting challenge. Of course, I been very involved in writing the class for freshman chemists. The question then is, how do I present this to people that aren't even science majors? And so I thought a lot about that, thought about what do those students need to know? What will they need to get out of the chapter? How do I present that in a way that makes sense based on where the experiences they've had? And so I went to work and sent it out for some comments and threw half of it away and started a lot of those all over again, because it was still too focused on the science, the math. Very interesting experience. Had to really try to get in the mind of a variety of different freshmen and try to understand what the barriers were, so I could try to help them along, understand a good process for problem solving.
Mine was a lot like Dr. McCluskey's. I teach a whole course in business ethics where the whole course is focused on decision making and in recognizing issues and the stakeholders, the issues, and how do you go about resolving a dilemma when you have conflicts between different values, and then condensing that down to an article where it was going to be understandable by not just business students, but by all students and at a freshman level. So that was a bit of a challenge in trying to follow some of the critical thinking paths, so it fits in with Dr. Sia's on the critical thinking, and yet make it applicable to things that they might run into. So it was a bit of a challenge.
Thinking about how this book will be used and how students will be in their first year of college. It's an exciting year, but it's a transition year. Thinking back to your own first year of college, what 3 words would you use to describe that experience? Dr. Sia?
I think I'll go with confusing, refreshing, and challenging. Confusing because there were so many things to pay attention to, so many decisions to make, and it wasn't always clear what were the important things to pay attention to, what were the right choices, or even what was supposed to be going on. Refreshing because there were so many opportunities, and it felt like, for me, a lot of the expectations just disappeared. There were so many different things to try out. There was one point where I thought about, I think, English, biology, psychology, or philosophy as a major, and it was very, very invigorating to have that kind of opportunity. And then challenging, because I think it's really important to challenge yourself that first year. I did a lot of things that I really never thought I would do. The big one my freshman year was that there was an opportunity to travel abroad to Israel and Egypt because some people dropped out of the program, and I ended up going on that. And that was something I'd never really thought about, and that happened, December of my freshman year, and I was like, this is what has to happen. I have to keep challenging myself, so I do things I never expected to be able to do.
Dr. McCluskey?
Well, I don't know if it's all a word, but I think OMG, and challenging and exciting. Oh my gosh, just because the whole experience so different from high school, the demands that were so much higher from high school, having to push myself far beyond anything I've ever done before. And so, can I do this? Can I survive? And that's where the challenging comes from too. It was a challenging experience, and challenging myself to rise to that level. And then the excitement, meeting new people, learning new things, whether in my classes, outside classes, learning things about myself, things I could do, things that maybe I couldn't do so well. So it was certainly grew a lot, learned a whole lot about myself in that year.
Professor Thompson?
Well, not words, it's a story, and I'll try to keep it brief, but I was atypical. I usually tell people in my younger years my hormones were more powerful than my intellect, and as a result, I had 2 children by the time I was 20. So when I went to school, I was working and raising children, and it took me 10 years. So I have an affinity for the folks who are going to school, who have to work. Maybe neither one of my parents even finished high school, much less any college, but where they come from backgrounds where things are a bit of a struggle. So for me, it was always balancing. I have children, I have work, I have school, and I never got to participate in some of the things that students here can participate in. But so for me, it was always that way. I mean, I never just went to school. So it was always working and going to school.
And the words I'm thinking of might apply to you, exciting and exhausting.
Exactly. Yeah.
Definitely. And
but it changed my life, and it changed my children's lives, and for me to come back to education after spending 25 years in public accounting has just been a blessing, because it's giving back to the next generation. And
right.
So I'm thrilled.
And you know that you're making an investment in yourself, no matter how exhausting it is. What I can remember is having to learn how to lower my expectations of myself, because I had had a pretty smooth time in high school, and so when I got to college and the same work ethic wasn't producing the same results, I had to realize, okay, I've got to make some difficult choices, I've got to figure things out. So it was a shakedown process, but ultimately came out on the other side figuring it out. So, and of course, when you were told about your topic, you might have thought, okay, I know that this subject I'm not the first person to write about this. And so how do you locate your chapter in an ongoing conversation about that topic? Dr. Sia?
For me, one of the chapters in social psychology I cover is social cognition, which has to do with the types of thoughts that happen in our head that we're not aware of and might not necessarily control. And so for about 5 years, I've really been struggling with that, teaching that in social psychology. And one of the big challenges was getting students to believe their brain messes with them when they're not aware of it, because they like to believe that is something they're in total control of. And so I had started building interventions that I'd been gradually testing out, and had finally gotten to a point where I didn't get the resistance from the students, where they would believe that, yeah, my brain does this. And that was why I was doing that presentation at a local research conference to kind of show some of the models and demos that I'd come up with. So for me, it fell in really nicely. It was something I just happened to be working on to improve teaching a certain type of information in my classes, and then it's like, no, this would be wonderful to get into the freshman course, because not everyone takes social psychology, but everyone's brain tries to trick them.
Got it. Dr. McCluskey?
Well, since we've been working intently on a problem-solving course that year, it fit in very well. We've been thinking about developing that course for a couple of years. We've done a lot of research in the educational literature about what's known about problem solving, how do people approach problem solving, what are the different barriers that people have to problem solving. And the year he asked me, we were in the middle of this new course that we were teaching for the first time, finding some things that worked very well, some things that not so much, that we had to modify. So in that way, it fit in very well as a continuation of a big focus that not only I, but the whole department and even many in the science area had been talking about and thinking about for quite some time.
Thank you.
Well, for me, it's been intertwined for a number of years. I was on the Texas State Board of Public Accountancy when some pretty famous failures occurred with Enron and some other companies, and so the state board put in place a requirement to be eligible to sit for the CPA exam. You had to have an ethics course. And the dean at TLU at that time felt that it was important for all business students to take an ethics course. And since I was active in the profession, it fell to me to start to put that course together. Since then, I've been involved nationally on the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy, where we have a requirement now in the National for some ethics education to be eligible for the CPA. And so there's movements nationally. I've been in that conversation for years. It's been a fascinating experience, and I have just loved the experience that it's provided for some of our students, because usually people come in saying, I know my values, you just do what's right. And they really haven't thought through all of the complications that exist when you're trying to actually make decisions that match your ethical values. So it's been very rewarding to see it move throughout the profession, and also to see the impact on the students in the class.
In each case, I'm thinking of each of your chapters and how each of your chapters posits questions and has scenarios that map each of those subjects out, so it's pretty exciting. For me, when I wrote the introduction, the one thing that I was very aware of is that college reading isn't something that students understand until they're in it and doing it. And I mean, if you think about, well, I know how to read, we all know how to read, but of course that common conception of what it means to read doesn't really break down what is required when you read a difficult text. And of course read a lot of articles about this issue and how we need to do a better job of helping students to make that transition so that they feel comfortable reading difficult texts. So I had that very much in mind when I wrote the introduction, definitely. The other thing I was curious about is how you see your chapter contributing to what we hope our students will become as a result of the TLU experience. So I was wondering if you could comment on that. How does your chapter contribute to the development of our students?
I would hope that it helps them understand their thinking in a way that allows them to maximize their classes, as well as cut some of their peers and their faculty some slack when it's obvious that some things are based on the way our brains work, missing communications, those types of things. I also really hope, I think in the chapter I mentioned that humans learn best from failure, but we always try to avoid it. I really hope people start seeing when they struggle, when they hit a roadblock, that is, okay, this is something I'm going to remember now. Let's take this opportunity. And it doesn't, I'm not saying failure ever feels good or that our students should aim to fail, but when they find themselves struggling or failing, they should realize this is the best time for me to learn, because I will remember this, because the feeling is aversive. And I think that could carry them throughout both careers. You have to struggle, interpersonal relations, almost everything. There's that type of underlying kind of system to it. So
Yeah, that seems like an ageless message, the idea that we all need to be more comfortable with our mistakes. Dr. McCluskey?
I think problem solving is part of life. No matter whether it's your personal life, whether you get into a fight with your boyfriend or your girlfriend or your spouse, whether it's your job. I know my dad was an artist. He used to enjoy telling people when they'd ask, "Are you disappointed that your son isn't an artist?" He says, "Oh, we have the same job." He said, "A painter and a chemist, how do they have the same job?" Well, we both solve problems. I solve problems in paint, and my son, he solves problems in chemicals, but it's the same job. And the neat thing about problem solving is the process is pretty much the same no matter where you solve it. Right now I'm in the administration at TLU, and I'm solving problems, not in chemistry, not so much in teaching, but how do I help students learn the most? How do I help professors help students learn the most? How do I bring opportunities to TLU? Just another form of problem solving.
Interesting how our areas tie in together so well, because when I was sitting in judgment, when I was a CPA cop, as one might call it, for CPAs, what I discovered was that most people don't get in trouble by making one bad decision. Most people do not wake up one morning and say, I'm going to do something fraudulent. They slide into it by a series of bad decisions. And so the sooner you can recognize the path that you're on, the sooner you can recognize your mistake, acknowledge it, and change the direction, the less likely there is to be a disaster. And that's true for all of us, whether we're a freshman entering college or whether we're retired and at the end of your career. So it's so important, and it can make such a difference to not just that person, but the people around them.
So a question for all of you. I'm a freshman and it's late and I've had a full day and I need to read your chapter for a class discussion tomorrow. What kind of motivation can you give me that will make me want to sit down and get out my pen and go after that chapter? Do a little soft sell on your chapter for me.
It will give you things. You can play tricks on your roommates and your friends, and you can make them look stupid. No, I'm kind of joking there, and I'm also kind of not joking. A lot of the things we get to discuss and demos in there just invite a certain amount of a prankster or trickster spirit. If you don't see yourself doing this, I invite you to use some of the information in the chapters and try them on your classmates or roommates and see how they answer the questions, how they deal with the challenges in there, because I'm pretty certain you're going to find most of them are cognitive misers. And then you can also see if your classmates read, and then you can laugh at them if they didn't.
Okay, Dr. McCluskey.
Sounds good. I think I go back to the fact that problem solving is something that we all do all our life. Basically, there are two types of jobs. Physical labor, which is important, but can be a lot of work, and thinking, problem-solving jobs, and sometimes there are many different combinations. But problem-solving is very important. Memorizing, computers do it faster, cheaper. It's problem-solving. It's hard. It takes a lot of work. Dr. Sia was talking about the struggle, and that's true with problem solving. No pain, no gain. Works for sports, it works for your brain. It's hard, it takes practice, it takes years of practice, but the paybacks can be huge.
So embedded somewhere in that problem-solving chapter are some tips for athletes that they may not have even realized that even athletes can benefit from a chapter on problem solving.
Sure, you have to tackle someone that's behind four big guys. How are you going to do it? How can you trick those guys into getting out of the way? Sure, I mean a lot of sports are very intellectual. A lot of problems. How do I make the game go my way? Yeah.
Got it.
I think mine is just fun. I mean, they'll have a good time with it, and they'll be surprised at the difference in opinions that exist in their classroom. And people can get really excited and feel very strongly that they're absolutely right, and they'll have different opinions on the same question. Mm-hmm. So it's applied problem solving.
Everybody likes a good debate, and
yes.
I remember enjoying that part of your chapter.
Students at TLU engage in high-impact educational experiences that include civic engagement, aesthetic expression, critical thinking, and a focus on intercultural knowledge in a community that welcomes the interplay of faith and reason.